All right, it's time for Down to the Wire, joined now by Matthew Berry from the set of Fantasy Football Now to give you all the latest information to set your fantasy football lineups today. And Matthew, it sounds like weather is going to be a factor today in Cleveland where the Browns and Steelers play. How do you expect that to impact that game from a fantasy standpoint?
Well, it's not ideal, but, we saw Dan Graziano from there earlier, and it didn't look nearly as bad as I think we were expecting from all the weather reports. So, to me, I think he used it a little bit as a tiebreaker. If there was a guy that you were on the fence with, maybe you go with somebody that isn't in that game. But you're still starting your stars. You're still starting Antonio Brown and Jarvis Landry and Juju Smith-Schuster. And I think you're starting both the running backs in terms of Hyde and James Conner. So, listen, Josh Gordon, we know he's a risk-reward sort of play there. To me, I'd use it as kind of a tiebreaker with some of the question mark guys, the David Njokus of the world, if you will. So that's how I'm impacting it, because I think it'll be less impactful than we expected, given the weather reports earlier this week.
What do you expect,
agree with that
from Josh Gordon?
Well, General Manager John Dorsey built this team to play in weather like this. Nick Chubb and Carlos Hyde. And Josh Gordon, I'm expecting about 20 snaps, give or take a few.
20 plays for Josh Gordon.
Give or take a few.
Well, and there you see some of the notable actives and inactives today. Most notably, 2 rookie running backs inactive. Sony Michel in New England, which would mean a steady dose of James White and Rex Burkhead. And Marlon Mack inactive for the Colts today, which means that rookie Jordan Wilkins will get his first start. But keep in mind, the Colts also are without Anthony Costanzo, their left tackle. So the offensive line is in a little bit of disarray at this point in time. What stands out to you about that list, Morton? Anybody on there?
Nothing stands out to me about that last. No, Sony Michel would have been fun to see if he'd been healthy, but we didn't expect it.
All right, now time for fantasy long shots. Matthew, who is your fantasy long shot today?
My fantasy long shot, very quickly off that inactive list, I will just say Jeremy Hill's going to have a role in New England today as well. But my fantasy long shot is Ricky Seals-Jones. The tight end in Arizona. After Larry Fitzgerald and David Johnson, they don't have a lot established in that offense. Washington last year allowed the 6th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. 6 different times last year, a tight end scored over 14 fantasy points against the Redskins. Listen, very small sample, but in the 4 games last year that Ricky Seals-Jones got at least 5 targets, he averaged over 11 fantasy points per game. Evan Ingram was a top 5 tight end last year, averaging just over 11 points a game as well. So Ricky Seals-Jones, who's available in a ton of leagues, I think is a nice sleeper today. He's my tight end 13 for the week.
Well, James Conner of the Steelers may seem like an obvious one, but he's kind of been downplayed because of Le'Veon Bell's absence. But this is a guy who's lost 11% body fat since last year. Remember, he had cancer less than 3 years ago. And the Steelers' offensive line, they want to make this guy look good. But otherwise, he's also learned the passing game, and Ben Roethlisberger trusts him in that passing game, both in pass protection and a little bit as a receiver.
My fantasy long shot today is the Dolphins wide receiver Albert Wilson came over through free agency. The Dolphins lost Jarvis Landry. They have to find some way to replace all those targets from the slot position. No Devontae Parker. He's inactive today. I think Albert Wilson could shine in Miami.